In the unforgiving dust of the Arizona Territory, a woman's worth was often measured by the man she married, by his land, his cattle, his standing. And in the spring of 1878, the town of Redemption decided that Catherine O'Malley, the educated daughter of their late doctor, the town's most eligible bride, was suddenly worth less than nothing. They didn't just disapprove, they laughed, they jeered, because she hadn't married a rancher or a banker. She had bound her life to a man they saw as a savage, a cripple, an Apache warrior named Chayton, broken in body and spirit. This is the story of that laughter, and how it died in their throats as the woman they scorned and the warrior they pitied carved an empire from the dirt, ruling the territory, not with fear, but with unbreakable pride. The town of Redemption, Arizona, was a blister on the sun-scorched palm of the desert. It existed for two reasons: a shallow but stubborn vein of silver in the surrounding hills, and a vital watering hole on the cattle trail north. Its social order was as rigid as the dried mud in its streets. At the top was Silas Croft, a man whose vast cattle ranch, the Circle C, sprawled across the territory like a possessive hand. Below him were the merchants, the sheriff, and the ranchers. At the bottom was everyone else, including the local Apache, who was seen as a necessary nuisance at best, and a dangerous plague at worst. Catherine Kate O'Malley had once occupied a privileged space just beneath Silas Croft. Her father, Dr. Alistair O'Malley, had been the only doctor for 100 miles, a man respected for his sharp mind and steady hands. He had given his daughter an education rare for a woman on the frontier, filling her head with Shakespeare philosophy and medical knowledge. When he passed from a sudden fever, Kate was left with his small but sturdy house, his extensive library, and a deep-seated sense of justice that the town found increasingly inconvenient. At 24, she was beautiful, with hair the color of whiskey and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Silas Croft had made his intentions clear. A marriage to him would secure her future and solidify his dynasty. He was handsome in a severe, granite-jawed way, and undeniably powerful. Every mother in Redemption pushed her daughter towards men of lesser standing, knowing Croft's gaze was fixed on Kate. But Kate found his possessiveness chilling his ambition, a suffocating heat. She demurred politely but firmly for months. The event that shattered Redemption's fragile peace happened on a blistering July afternoon. A small band of Chiricahua Apache, pushed to the brink of starvation by broken treaties and encroaching settlements, had raided a supply wagon belonging to Croft. It was a desperate, clumsy act. Croft's men, led by his brutish foreman, Bartholomew Barth Taggart, hunted them down with a terrifying efficiency. They didn't bring back prisoners. They brought back bodies slung over saddles like deer, a grim warning to any others. But one was still alive. Barely. His name was Chayton, which meant falcon in his tongue. He had been a renowned warrior, his movements once as fluid and deadly as his namesake. But a volley of rifle fire had shattered his left leg and hip, and the fall from his horse had done the rest. He was a ruin of a man, his body a canvas of blood, dust, and broken bones. Taggart dragged him into the center of town and dumped him in the dirt in front of the saloon. Let him be an example. Taggart bellowed his face, flushed with whiskey and victory. Let the buzzards pick him clean. The townsfolk gathered some jeering others, watching with a grim, silent satisfaction. Silas Croft stood on the saloon porch, a thin smile on his lips. This was his justice. But Kate O'Malley, hearing the commotion from her father's clinic, pushed through the crowd. She saw not a savage, but a man drowning in his own blood. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You don't ask a man his creed before you set a bone, Catherine. You ask where it hurts. Sheriff, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the morbid chatter. This man needs a doctor." Sheriff Miller, a man whose spine was made of candle wax, shifted nervously. "Now, Kate, this is Croft's business. He's an Apache renegade. He is a wounded man in the middle of your street." She countered her gaze, unwavering. "Are you going to let him die like an animal?" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. "He is an animal, someone slurred from the saloon." Kate ignored them. She knelt in the dust, her clean dress soaking up the grime and blood. Chayton's eyes were black stones of hatred and pain, but they followed her every move. She saw the intelligence flickering there, the unbroken spirit trapped in a mangled cage. "I'm taking him to my father's clinic," she declared, looking not at the sheriff, but directly at Silas Croft. "It's what a decent town would do." Croft's smile vanished. This was a direct challenge to his authority, a public rebuke. His eyes narrowed. "That is a foolish decision, Miss O'Malley. You harbor a killer. You become an accomplice. I harbor a patient." She shot back, her voice ringing with the authority she'd inherited from her father. She turned to two young farmhands who had always respected her family. "Henry Paul helped me get him onto a shutter." Hesitantly shamed by her courage, they complied. As they lifted the broken warrior, the town didn't cheer. They stared, mouths agape. And then a low, cruel sound began to bubble up. It started with Barth Taggart, a guttural chuckle. It spread through the crowd, a wave of snickering, of derisive laughter. The educated proper Miss O'Malley dirtying herself for a red skin. Silas Croft's intended tending to his trash. The absurdity of it was to them hilarious. The laughter followed her all the way to her father's clinic. It was the sound of her social ruin, the death knell of her reputation. But as Kate bolted the door behind her, laying the unconscious Apache on her father's examination table, she felt not shame, but a hardening resolve. Let them laugh. The town of redemption had just revealed its true ugly face, and she was turning her back on it for good. The first weeks were a blur of pain, fever, and suspicion. Chayton hovered on the edge of death, his body consumed by infection. Kate worked tirelessly, using every bit of knowledge her father had taught her. She cleaned the wounds, set the bones as best she could, and brewed foul-smelling herbal remedies to fight the fever, some from her father's books, others from a tattered journal detailing local Apache medicine. Chayton, in his rare moments of lucidity, was a cornered wolf. He refused her food, spat out her medicine, and watched her with an unblinking, hostile glare. To him, she was just another white face, her kindness a trick he couldn't comprehend. He spoke no English, and she spoke no Apache. Their communication was a pantomime of gestures and raw emotion. The town, meanwhile, had fully ostracized her. The mercantile owner Jebediah Smith suddenly found his prices for her were double. Women who once greeted her warmly now crossed the street to avoid her. Children threw stones at her windows. Her only visitor was Silas Croft. He arrived one evening removing his hat as he stepped into the clinic, filling the space with his immense presence. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and herbs. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low purr. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point. You have a good heart. Now let the savage die. Come away from this. I can make the town forget." Kate was cleaning a basin, her back to him. "He has a name. It's Chayton. And he's not going to die." Croft stepped closer. "This isn't about him. It's about you. You are destroying yourself, your father's memory." "For what? For him?" He gestured dismissively toward the other room where Chayton lay. She finally turned her eyes blazing. "My father would be ashamed of what you did. What this whole town did. He taught me to heal, not to stand by and watch a man be torn apart by vultures. He is the vulture." Croft's voice rose, his composure cracking. He and his kind prey on us, on our work, on our civilization. He was hungry, Silas. His people are starving because men like you take their land and break your promises." The slap was so sudden it was more a crack of sound than a sensation. Kate stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her ears ringing. Croft's face was a mask of fury, his hand still raised. He looked horrified by his own action, but the rage underneath was real. "You will not speak to me that way," he hissed. "You are mine, Catherine. I have been patient, I have been courteous, but my patience has its limits." From the other room came a low groan, followed by a sudden, sharp scraping sound. Both Kate and Croft froze. Slowly limping horribly, Chayton appeared in the doorway. He was leaning on a wooden crate, his face pale with sweat and agony, but his eyes were pure fire. In his hand, he held a shard of glass he'd broken from a medicine bottle. It wasn't much of a weapon, but the intent was unmistakable. He was defending her. Croft stared at the crippled warrior, then back at Kate. The scene was an insult beyond measure. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "So you've chosen your protector, a broken hawk. Very well. Enjoy your new life, Miss O'Malley. You'll find this town has a long memory." He turned and strode out, slamming the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Chayton's strength gave out. He collapsed the glass, shattering on the floor. Kate rushed to his side, easing him back to his cot. That night, something shifted between them. He allowed her to dress his wounds without resistance. He drank the broth she offered. The next day he pointed to objects, a cup, a book, a needle, and she would say the English word. He would repeat it, his voice rough. Then he would tap his chest and say, "Chayton." He would point to her. "Catherine," she said. "Kate." He tried the name the K, and to sounds foreign on his tongue. He began to heal. The fever broke, and the wounds began to close. But it was clear his leg would never recover. The bones had been too badly shattered. He would walk, but with a permanent, painful limp, his left leg dragging uselessly behind him. The falcon's wings were clipped forever. They found a new language in the quiet evenings. She read to him from her father's books, not just medical texts, but Shakespeare and poetry. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the rhythm, the rise and fall of her voice. In return, he began to draw. Using charcoal from the stove, he would sketch maps in the dirt on the floor, showing her the hidden springs, the best hunting grounds, the secret paths through the mountains that only the Apache knew. He showed her his world, a world that existed alongside the dusty streets of redemption, yet was invisible to its inhabitants. One afternoon, Sheriff Miller appeared at her door, his face grim. "Kate, you gotta leave. Croft's stirring up trouble. He's telling folks the Apache is a threat, that you are hiding a whole war party. It ain't safe for you here no more." Kate knew he was right. The laughter had turned to whispers, and whispers were turning to threats. That night she sat across from Chayton, the lantern light casting long shadows on the walls. "We have to go," she said, using the simple words they now shared. "Not safe. Here." He nodded slowly, his gaze intense. He understood. He had known this from the beginning. But where could they go? She was a pariah, and he was a crippled Apache. They were outcasts, a tribe of two. Then Chayton did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He held her gaze and spoke a few careful, halting English words he had pieced together. "You, wife, me, husband, they, no touch wife." Kate stared at him, stunned. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a strategic proposal. A marriage, even one scorned, offered a sliver of legitimacy, a shield, however flimsy. In the eyes of the law, a husband had rights, a duty to protect, and in the eyes of his people, A wife was sacred. It was a vow of mutual survival, the ultimate alliance of the dispossessed. She looked at this broken man who had tried to defend her with a piece of glass. She looked at the town outside her window, which had offered her nothing but scorn. Her choice was clear. Yes, she whispered. Husband. They were married by a traveling preacher passing through town, a nervous man named Father Michael, who was paid a silver dollar and asked no questions. The only witnesses were the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. When the news broke, the town of Redemption didn't just whisper. They roared with laughter. It was the scandal of the territory. Catherine O'Malley, the doctor's daughter, had married a crippled Apache. It was the punchline to a long, cruel joke. But as Kate and Chayton packed their wagon that night, they didn't hear the laughter. They heard only the quiet promise of a new beginning, a future they would have to build with their own hands, far from the echoes of mockery. They traveled north into the high desert plains that even Silas Croft considered worthless. It was a harsh, unforgiving landscape of sagebrush rock and relentless sun. They had a wagon, 2 sturdy mules, Kate's medical supplies, her father's books, and a handful of tools. To anyone else, it was a picture of destitution. To them, it was a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Chayton, despite his crippling limp, was the architect of their survival. He directed them to a small hidden canyon he knew from his youth, a place the white men had overlooked. Carved into the canyon wall was a shallow cave offering shelter from the wind and sun. Most importantly, at the back of the cave, a thin, steady trickle of water seeped from the rock, a secret spring, pure and life-giving. Water is life. Chayton stated his English growing more confident each day. Here we have life. Their first months were a brutal testament to their resilience. Kate's hands, once accustomed to turning the pages of a book, became calloused from digging and lifting stones. Together they expanded the cave building, a stone and adobe facade, creating a humble but defensible home. Chayton, unable to hunt in his old way, taught Kate how to set snares, her patience and steady hands, making her a natural. He showed her which plants were medicine and which were food. She in turn taught him to read and write, patiently guiding his hand as he formed the strange angular letters of the English alphabet. Their marriage, born of necessity, began to transform. It was a partnership forged in shared labor and mutual respect. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, Kate reading aloud, while Chayton carved intricate figures of animals and warriors from pieces of cottonwood. They learned each other's stories not just through words, but through shared silence and understanding glances. Kate discovered that beneath his stoic exterior, Chayton possessed a wry sense of humor. He learned that her perceived fragility was a lie. She had a core of iron that bent for no one. A quiet affection grew between them, deep and strong as the roots of the mesquite trees. Their homestead, which they called Falcon's Creek, slowly became more than just a home. It became a hub. Chayton's knowledge of the land was legendary among the scattered Apache bands. They learned that Chayton, the broken warrior, still lived, and that his white wife was a healer. They began to come cautiously at first to trade. They brought furs, woven blankets, and silver for Kate's medical aid for flour, sugar, and metal tools. Soon others followed. Prospectors, tired of the slim pickings around Redemption, came seeking Chayton's guidance on where to find water. Small independent ranchers squeezed by Silas Croft's ever-expanding empire came to trade cattle for supplies, finding Kate's prices fair and her dealings honest. Falcon's Creek became a trading post, an oasis of neutrality in a land defined by conflict. Their power was not in land or cattle, but in knowledge and access. Chayton knew the land secrets. Kate understood the world of contracts, letters, and numbers. Together, They were formidable. When a group of ranchers complained that Croft was damming a creek and stealing their water, Kate pored over territorial maps and her father's old legal books. She found a clause in the original land grants about shared water rights. She wrote a letter on their behalf to the territorial marshal in Tucson, a carefully worded, legally sound document that he couldn't ignore. The marshal, a man named Elias Rowe, rode up to investigate, and Croft was forced to release the water. It was a small victory, but it sent a shock wave through the territory. The woman who married the cripple had a mind as sharp as a lawyer's. The cripple she married knew the land better than any map-maker. The laughter from redemption began to sound hollow. Silas Croft heard of their growing influence, and it was like salt in a festering wound. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to crawl away and die in the desert. Instead, they were thriving. They were building something, and they were doing it on his territory. He saw their success not just as a business problem, but as a profound personal mockery of his power and his rejection. He sent Barth Taggart and a few of his men to pay Falcons Creek a visit. They weren't to start a war, just to deliver a message. They rode in one afternoon arrogant and armed their horses, kicking up dust. Well, Taggart sneered, looking at the bustling trading post at the mix of settlers and Apache trading peacefully. He spat a wad of tobacco near Kate's feet. Look what the buzzards dragged in. Playing House O'Malley, Kate stood on her porch, a shotgun held loosely in her arms. State your business, Taggart, or ride out. Chayton emerged from the house, his limp pronounced, but his posture proud. He leaned on a sturdy walking stick, but his eyes were like chips of obsidian. He said nothing, simply watching. Taggart's eyes flickered between them. The sight of them standing together, defiant, enraged him. Croft wants you to know this land is his. This water is his. You're squatting. He's giving you 1 week to clear out. After that, he let the threat hang in the air. Kate smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. You tell Mr. Croft that according to the Territorial Homestead Act of 1862, this land was unclaimed. We have filed a claim with the Land Office in Tucson. We have the papers to prove it. If he has a problem, he can take it up with the United States government. Taggart was momentarily stunned. He was a man of fists and guns, not laws and papers. This was a language he didn't understand. He looked to his men who shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the simple intimidation job he'd expected. Chayton took a slow step forward. He pointed his walking stick toward the canyon ridge. Taggart's men followed his gaze. Lined up on the rocks above, silent as ghosts, were a dozen Apache warriors, bows in hand. They hadn't been there a moment ago. Our friend's Chayton said, his voice soft but carrying in the still air. They do not like uninvited guests. Taggart's face went pale. He had walked into a trap. He and his handful of men were surrounded, hopelessly outmatched. He stared at Kate's shotgun, at Chayton's cold eyes, and at the archers on the ridge. He had brought threats, but he was the one who was threatened. Without another word, Taggart and his men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and humiliation in their wake. As the dust settled, Kate looked at Chayton, a slow smile spreading across her face. He had used his strategic mind, and she had used her legal knowledge. Together, they had beaten back the giant. The laughter from redemption was now completely silent. In its place, a new sound was rising across the territory, a whisper of respect mingled with fear. The outcasts were building an empire, and they would defend it with everything they had. The retreat of Barth Taggart was not an end, but a beginning. Silas Croft was not a man to be deterred by a single setback. Humiliation only sharpened his resolve. If he couldn't crush them with brute force, he would strangle them with cunning. He was a serpent, and he began to coil around Falcon's Creek, slowly tightening his grip. His first move was economic. He leaned on Jebediah Smith, the mercantile owner in Redemption, and other suppliers in the region. Suddenly, the freight wagons that once delivered goods to Kate found their axles breaking or their drivers falling ill just miles from her trading post. The price of flour, salt, and ammunition tripled overnight, but only for her. Croft was cutting off her supply lines, bleeding her dry. Kate saw the strategy immediately. "He's trying to starve us out," she told Chayton one evening, poring over their dwindling ledgers. "If we can't get supplies, we have nothing to trade. Our friends will have no reason to come here." Chayton listened, his face impassive, as he sharpened a knife by the firelight. When she was done, he looked up. "He thinks the road is his only weapon. He is wrong. There are other roads." The next week, Chayton disappeared. He was gone for 3 days, and Kate, despite her trust in him, felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. He returned at dawn on the 4th day, not alone. With him was a small, wiry man, with shrewd eyes named Hernan Castillo, the leader of a group of Comancheros traders from New Mexico who operated outside the laws of the Arizona Territory. They were notorious for trading with anyone, including the Apache and Comanche, and they knew smuggling routes that were invisible to men like Croft. A deal was struck. Castillo's traders would bring supplies from Santa Fe, using the secret trails Chayton had shown them. In return, they would get exclusive rights to trade for the high-quality silver ore that Kate's prospector allies were now mining in the hills. It was a risky partnership, but it was their only choice. The serpent's coil had been loosened. Croft's second attack was on their reputation. He began spreading rumors carried by his ranch hands to every saloon and settlement in the territory. He whispered that Falcon's Creek was a haven for murderers and renegades, that Kate O'Malley was a witch who had enchanted the Apache warrior, and that Chayton was secretly amassing a war party to drive all the white settlers from the land. Fear was a more potent poison than poverty. The territorial marshal Elias Rowe paid them another visit, this time with a posse of deputies. His face was grim. "I got petitions, Kate. Folks are scared. They're saying you're arming the Apache." "We're trading Elias," Kate said calmly, offering him a cup of coffee. "The same as any other post. The only difference is we don't ask a man the color of his skin before we trade with him." And the warriors on the ridge row pressed. Chayton answered before Kate could. "My wife's family," he said, his English now precise and steady. "They visit. They protect this house." Is it a crime to protect your house? Rowe was a fair man, but he was also a politician. He saw no evidence of a war party, only a peaceful, thriving community. Yet the fear was real. "Watch your step, you two," he warned before leaving. "Croft has the ear of the governor. He's painting a target on your backs." The rumors had their effect. Some of the white ranchers and prospectors, spooked by the stories, stopped coming. The air grew tense. But Croft's greatest weapon, the one he had been saving, was water. The small spring in their cave was the lifeblood of Falcon's Creek. It was enough for them and their immediate community, but it was finite. Chayton had shown Kate a place further up in the mountains, a much larger spring that fed the underground water table for the entire region, including their own small creek. This spring was on land that was technically unclaimed, but it fell within the vast sphere of the Circle C Ranch. Using a team of hired engineers from back east, Silas Croft began a massive project. He was going to dam the main spring and divert all the water to a new reservoir for his own cattle, thousands of head that were overgrazing the territory. The legal paperwork was dubious, pushed through by a corrupt official in Tucson, whom Croft had in his pocket. The effect would be catastrophic. Not only would Falcon's Creek dry up, but so would the wells of dozens of smaller ranches in the area. It was a move of breathtaking arrogance and cruelty, a way to crush all of his rivals, Kate and Chayton, foremost among them in one fell swoop. News of the dam project spread like a grass fire. A delegation of small ranchers, the very men who had been wary of Kate and Chayton, now arrived at their door hats in hand. Their leader was a grizzled old rancher named Gus Halloway. Mrs. O'Malley. "Chayton," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Croft's gonna ruin us. We heard what you did before with the letter. We were wondering if you could help us." Kate looked at the desperate faces of the men who had once shunned her. Chayton stood beside her, his expression unreadable. This was their chance. They could turn their backs, just as these men had once turned their backs on them. But Kate saw the bigger picture. This wasn't about revenge. This was about survival, about building a community that could stand against the tyranny of a man like Croft. "Mr. Croft is using the law as a weapon," Kate said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's time we taught him that it can be a shield as well." Chayton then spoke, his voice quiet but firm, addressing the ranchers directly. "My wife will fight with paper. I will fight with knowledge. But you must fight with us. No more whispers. No more hiding. We stand together, or we all fall." In the dusty yard of the trading post, an unlikely alliance was formed: a woman outcast, a crippled Apache warrior, a dozen desperate white ranchers, and the silent promise of support from the Apache bands in the hills. The serpent had coiled too tightly, and in its arrogance, it had forced its victims to band together. The final battle for the territory was about to begin. They weren't just fighting for their homes anymore. They were fighting for the soul of the land itself. The fight against Silas Croft's dam was not a war of bullets, but a war of attrition fought on two fronts. Kate waged her battle in letters and ledgers, while Chayton fought his in the canyons and the minds of men. Kate, Gus Halloway, and two other ranchers made the long, dusty journey to Tucson. They entered the territorial land office, a stuffy room that smelled of old paper and stale cigar smoke. The official Croft had bribed a man with a sweaty brow named Reginald Pike, dismissed them out of hand. "Mr. Orse, Croft's claim is perfectly legal, madam," he said, patronizingly, not even looking up from his paperwork. "The water rights are clear." "Are they?" Kate replied, placing a stack of documents on his desk. "Because according to my research, which includes the original federal surveys of this territory, that Spring is designated as a public water source. Your signature on Mr. Croft's claim, which privatizes it, is therefore in direct violation of federal law of 1866. I've also taken the liberty of documenting 3 other claims you've recently approved for Mr. Croft, all of which seem to benefit from a creative interpretation of territorial boundaries." Pike's face turned from pink to a pasty white. Kate's research was meticulous. She had spent weeks in her father's library, cross-referencing maps and statutes. She had found the chink in Croft's legal armor. Furthermore, she continued, her voice cold, "As a winter morning, we have a signed affidavit from a former Circle C ranch, hand a Mr. Samuel Jones, detailing a conversation he overheard between you and Mr. Croft concerning a transfer of $500. I believe the term for that is bribery." The official stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Kate had not just challenged him. She had cornered him. She had turned his own weapon, the bureaucracy of the law, against him. "A copy of this file has been sent to Marshal Rowe," Kate finished sweetly. "And another is on its way to the Department of the Interior in Washington. We expect construction on the dam to cease immediately pending a full investigation." While Kate was dismantling Croft's legal foundation, Chayton was eroding his operational one. He knew he couldn't fight Croft's army of cowboys head-on, but he also knew that an army like a man needs water to survive. Using his intimate knowledge of the terrain, Chayton, along with a few of Holloway's sons and a handful of his Apache brethren, began a campaign of strategic sabotage. They never engaged in open battle. Instead, they moved like ghosts in the night. They created small rock slides that blocked the supply roads to the dam construction site, forcing wagons to take days-long detours. They would find the smaller wells and water caches used by Croft's outlying cattle herds and foul them with dead animals, forcing the Circle C to pull its herds back closer to their home ranch, overgrazing the land and straining their resources. Chayton's masterpiece was a psychological one. He knew the cowboys were superstitious, their minds filled with tales of desert spirits and Apache ghosts. He and his men began creating strange, unsettling signs around the dam site. Unearthly whistles would echo through the canyons at night. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in bizarre, ritualistic patterns. An arrow fletched with the feather of an owl, a bird of ill omen, would appear embedded in the dam's framework each morning. The workers, already on edge in the hostile territory, began to whisper. They said the land was cursed, that the spirits were angry. Fights broke out. Men convinced they were being haunted, deserted their posts, taking their pay, and disappearing into the desert. The construction, already hampered by supply issues, slowed to a crawl. Barth Taggart, tasked with overseeing the project, grew increasingly furious and paranoid, seeing shadows in every corner. Silas Croft found himself besieged. His legal claim was crumbling in Tucson, and his dam site was bleeding money and manpower. He was being outmaneuvered by a woman with a book and a cripple with a walking stick. His rage, once a simmering fire, became a white-hot inferno. The pretense of civility was gone. If he couldn't strangle them with the law or outwit them with strategy, he would resort to the old ways. He would burn them out. He summoned Barth Taggart back to the main ranch. The instructions were simple and brutal. "I don't want them scared off," Croft snarled, his voice a low growl. "I want them gone. Burn the trading post to the ground. Kill the man. Bring me the woman." "Understand," Taggart grinned, a cruel, predatory expression. This was the language he understood. He gathered 20 of the most ruthless men on the Circle C payroll. They were no longer cowboys. They were a private army armed with rifles, pistols, and torches. The war of whispers and water was over. The war of fire and blood was about to begin. Unbeknownst to Croft, however, his plan had already been compromised. A young Mexican stable hand on the Circle C ranch, whose sister Kate had once saved from a deadly snakebite, overheard the orders. He felt a debt of honor. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped away from the ranch and rode like the wind, not to warn the sheriff, but to warn the one person he knew could stop them. He rode for Falcons Creek. The warning came just after sunset. The young stable hand, his horse lathered, and near collapse, gasped out the news of Taggart's impending attack. There was no time to run, no time to appeal to the law. The fight was coming to their doorstep. Panic was the first instinct for the ranchers and traders gathered at the post. But Kate's calm voice cut through the fear. "We knew this day might come. We have a choice. We can scatter and be hunted down one by one, or we can make our stand here. Together." It was Chayton, however, who gave them a plan. He was not the swift warrior of his youth, but his mind had become a razor-sharp weapon. He saw the battlefield not as a patch of dirt to be defended, but as a chessboard to be controlled. "They expect a fort," he said, his eyes scanning the faces in the firelight. "We will not give them one. They expect fear. We will give them a trap." He laid out the strategy with quiet, deadly precision. The main trading post, the symbol of their community, was a liability. It was a tinderbox. They would use it as bait. The women and children were sent to the safety of the hidden cave, guarded by Gus Halloway and a few older men. The rest, a small force of 12 ranchers and 10 Apache warriors, would melt into the rocks and shadows of the canyon. Chayton's plan was built on his deep understanding of his enemy's arrogance. Taggart would come expecting a simple fight ride in shoot-burn. He would be focused on the light of the trading post, blinded by his own bloodlust. He would not be looking at the darkness that surrounded him. As Taggart and his 20 riders thundered into the canyon an hour before midnight, they saw exactly what they expected. The trading post was lit, smoke curling from its chimney. It looked like a peaceful sleeping homestead. Taggart let out a whoop of triumph, pulling a torch from its holster. "Let's give them a proper housewarming," he roared to his men. They charged forward, firing their rifles wildly into the air, their dark shapes illuminated by the flickering torchlight. They were a wave of chaotic violence, focused entirely on the building ahead. They didn't notice the silent figures detaching themselves from the rocks on either side of the canyon. They didn't hear the soft scrape of a boot on stone or the quiet knock of an arrow. The first volley was not gunfire. It was a flight of arrows from the Apache warriors positioned on the canyon rim. Silent and deadly, they found their marks. 3 of Croft's men tumbled from their saddles without a sound. Confusion rippled through the attackers. They had expected a fight from the front, not death from above. Before they could recover, a second attack came. The ranchers, hidden behind a line of boulders on the left, opened fire. Their shots were disciplined, aimed not to kill, but to cripple. They shot at the horses. A screaming, panicked mass of downed animals created a barricade, trapping half of Taggart's men in the open. Taggart, enraged, bellowed orders, trying to rally his disorganized force. "It's a trick, they're in the rocks. Flush them out." But then, the final piece of Chayton's trap was sprung. Kate, positioned on the roof of the trading post with 2 of Halloway's best marksmen, fired the signal shot. It wasn't aimed at the men, but at a wagon seemingly abandoned near the mouth of the canyon. The wagon was filled with oil from their lamps and dry brush. The bullet hit a small keg of black powder Kate had placed inside. The explosion was deafening. A wall of fire erupted, sealing the canyon entrance. Taggart and his men were trapped. The hunter had become the hunted. The battle devolved into a desperate, terrifying melee. Croft's men, disoriented and surrounded, fired wildly into the darkness. But Chayton's forces were disciplined. They used the terrain, firing from cover, melting away, and reappearing in new positions. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. In the midst of the chaos, Barth Taggart saw a figure move near the trading post. It was Chayton directing his men, his limp painfully obvious, as he moved between points of cover. For Taggart, this was personal. He let out a roar of pure hatred and charged, ignoring the battle raging around him, his eyes locked on the crippled warrior who had humiliated him. He crashed into Chayton, the force of the impact sending both men to the ground. Taggart's size and strength were overwhelming. He pinned Chayton, his massive hands closing around his throat. "I'll kill you with my bare hands, you red-skin filth!" He snarled, his face inches from Chayton's. Chayton couldn't move his broken leg, but his arms were free. As Taggart squeezed Chayton's hand, shot up, not with a fist, but with fingers held stiffly. He drove them into the soft spot of Taggart's throat. Taggart gagged his grip, loosening as he choked for air. In that split second, Chayton twisted, pulling a knife from his belt. He didn't stab. He used the heavy pommel to strike Taggart at the temple. The big man grunted and slumped sideways, unconscious, but alive. Just as Chayton struggled to his feet, another figure emerged from the smoke. It was Silas Croft. He had followed his men, unable to resist watching his victory in person. He held a Colt peacemaker, and it was aimed directly at Chayton's heart. "My mistake," Croft said, his voice eerily calm amidst the gunfire. "I should have killed you myself that first day." Before he could pull the trigger, a voice cut through the air. Silas, both men, turned. Kate stood on the porch of the trading post, her face smudged with soot, a Winchester rifle in her hands. It was leveled not at Croft's chest, but at his head. "It's over," she said, her voice steady. "Your men are beaten. Drop the gun." Croft laughed, a dry, broken sound. "And let you two live to mock me. I built this territory. It's mine. You are an infestation." He swung his pistol toward Kate. The world seemed to slow down. 2 shots rang out, so close together, they sounded like one. Croft's shot went wide, splintering the wood of the porch next to Kate's head. Kate's shot did not miss. Silas Croft stood frozen for a moment, a look of profound surprise on his face. A small, dark hole had appeared in the center of his forehead. He dropped his pistol, staggered back a step, and then collapsed into the dust. His reign of terror finally at an end. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the groans of the wounded. The battle was over. The outcasts had not just survived, they had won. They stood bruised and bloodied in the ashes of the old order, the undisputed masters of their territory. The aftermath of the battle was not a celebration, but a quiet, somber accounting. They had lost 2 men, 1 rancher and 1 Apache warrior, who were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the canyon. Croft's surviving men were rounded up, their weapons taken. When Marshal Elias Rowe arrived 2 days later, drawn by news of the firefight, he found not a scene of chaotic slaughter, but an orderly community already rebuilding. Kate and Chayton presented him with the facts. They provided testimony from the stable hand, who warned them, showed the torches, and oil brought by Taggart's men, and pointed to the body of Silas Croft. Taggart, now their prisoner, confessed the entire plan in exchange for a promise that he wouldn't be handed over to the Apache. Rowe, a pragmatic man, saw the truth clearly. It was a clear case of self-defense on a massive scale. The official report would state that Silas Croft had been killed while leading an illegal armed assault on a lawful homestead. The Circle C empire, built on intimidation and greed, crumbled overnight. In the months and years that followed, Falcons Creek was transformed. With the Circle C broken up and its lands opened for settlement under fairer terms, the trading post boomed. It became the heart of a new kind of community. The town of redemption, its economic lifeblood now re-rooted, began to wither its laughter, long since forgotten. People began to speak, not of redemption, but of O'Malley's Canyon. Kate and Chayton did not rule with guns or laws, but with the same principles that had allowed them to survive mutual respect, fair dealings, and an unshakable sense of justice. Their home became the unofficial center of the territory. Kate, with her legal mind, arbitrated disputes between ranchers. Chayton, with his deep knowledge of the land and its people, forged a lasting peace between the new settlers and the Apache, creating a system of trade and shared resources that benefited both. Their partnership was the bedrock of this new world. They were a perfect union of 2 cultures, 2 minds, 2 strengths. Kate was the strategist, the planner, the voice of reason and law. Chayton was the tactician, the keeper of ancient wisdom, the soul of the land. His crippled leg was a constant reminder of the world's cruelty, but it was no longer a mark of weakness. It was a symbol of his survival, of his ability to turn a broken body into an unbreakable mind. They ruled a territory not defined by lines on a map, but by the bonds of community they had forged. Their empire was not one of land or gold, but of trust and pride. The pride of the ranchers who owned their own land, free from tyranny. The pride of the Apache who could trade and live with dignity. And the quiet, profound pride of the 2 outcasts who had faced down a world of scorn and built a legacy in the dust. Travelers would sometimes pass through hearing tales of the legendary couple. They would see Catherine O'Malley, her hair now streaked with grey, poring over books and ledgers, her word as solid as the canyon walls. And they would see Chayton the Falcon, walking with his pronounced limp, teaching a group of settler and Apache children how to read the signs of the earth. They would see a man and a woman from two different worlds who had found in each other the missing half of their own souls. The town had laughed when she married a crippled Apache warrior, but here in the empire they had built together there was no laughter. There was only the wind whistling through the canyon, carrying with it the enduring story of a love that had not only survived the brutal frontier, but had tamed it. The story of Catherine O'Malley and Chayton is more than just a tale of the Old West. It is a testament to the idea that true strength is not found in brute force or loud proclamations, but in the quiet resilience of the human spirit. It's a story of how intellect and wisdom, when united by love and respect, can overcome prejudice and build something that lasts. They were two outcasts who refused to be defined by the scorn of others, and in doing so, they redefined the very territory they called home. Their pride was not in conquest, but in creation, not in power, but in peace. If their tale of courage and defiance resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who appreciates a true Western legend, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. We have many more stories from the untamed frontier waiting to be told. Thank you for listening.